The thought of breaking up with a swaddle can be enough to make you sweat, particularly if your baby is sleeping really well in their swaddle. The good news is that the idea of transitioning out of the swaddle or the anticipation is typically worse than the reality. Today, I'm going to share my advice for when and how to transition away from swaddling. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. After you finally figure out which swaddle works best for your baby, it can be a lifesaver in the sleep department, particularly if you have a baby with a strong moro startle reflex. As soon as you start to see the positive effects of using the swaddle, you may find yourself starting to worry about how your baby will ever sleep without it. I have some good news. The anticipation of the transition out of the swaddle is often far worse than the reality of making that change. But let's start with the ideal time to make that transition away from the swaddle. I recommend transitioning out of the swaddle at 4 months or when your baby has rolled or is even showing signs that they are close to rolling. For example, getting onto their side by themselves. If a baby hasn't started rolling, I do still like to transition them out of the swaddle and into the sleep sack right around 4 months because we don't want to restrict their movement or slow them down from learning to roll. Plus, the very vast majority of the time, babies learn to roll and then they are happier rolling over and sleeping on their stomachs. So it can ultimately help improve naps and night sleep if we don't restrict their movement. Now, if your baby rolls early or shows signs of being really close to rolling before 4 months, you're going to want to ditch the swaddle cold turkey. And this can be challenging because some babies still do have that strong moro startle reflex, which can really cause sleep disruptions. A good transitional sleep sack that you can try is the Zippity D Zip, which does hold their hand inside the sleep sack and it helps limit that startle movement. I will link to that in the show notes. As I mentioned in episode 76, I like to transition kids right into a sleep sack and then continue to use a sleep sack for sleep for years to come. Hop on over and listen to that episode if you want to hear more about sleep sacks. If you're in the camp where your child isn't yet rolling, but you've decided it is time to start transitioning them out of the swaddle, you may be wondering how best to go about doing that with the least amount of disruption to their sleep. I generally recommend just putting them right into the sleep sack versus doing something like one arm out and one arm in for the swaddle. That's very commonly recommended. And while I don't think that one arm out and one arm in is harmful, I often think it makes the transition more challenging for some babies. And I suspect that it's because it makes them feel unbalanced to have one arm that can just move around freely and then one arm that is completely restricted. So I think it frustrates babies and it can negatively impact their sleep. If you are looking for a more gradual approach and your baby isn't yet close to rolling, so that's not why you're making this change, I would start by putting your baby down at bedtime in their sleep sack. But if they wake in the middle of the night at a time that's earlier than usual, or they wake and they're having a much harder time resettling and getting back to sleep, then I go ahead and transition them back into their swaddle for the rest of the night. So we're just trying to see what initial stretch we can get out of the swaddle. Continue to start each night without the swaddle, and then ideally over a few days or up to a week, your baby will adjust and they will be sleeping throughout the entire night in the sleep sack, just like they previously were in the swaddle. You can also start with not using the swaddle for just one nap per day. So you don't need to risk suddenly getting 3 or 4 naps that are too short. You can just start with that one. And then once the one nap in the sleep sack, rather than the swaddle, is kind of back to a typical length, move on to doing 2 naps per day in the sleep sack. And soon as you go through that process, you'll no longer feel you need the swaddle for the naps either. Now, if you're listening and thinking, my baby already wakes a bunch at night in the swaddle, or they only take 30-minute naps to begin with while being swaddled, you may decide that you want to do sleep training at 4 months. If you decide to move forward with what I would say is a more structured sleep training approach, I definitely recommend going cold turkey with stopping the swaddle. Just switch to the sleep sack as you begin sleep training and don't look back, because I generally find it's better when you're thinking about sleep training to put all the pieces together at once and then recondition your baby to new sleep habits, different sleep expectations, rather than doing the sleep training in the swaddle and then a couple weeks down the road needing to transition away and potentially needing to re-sleep train. So if you're going to sleep train and your baby is still in a swaddle, I would make that transition as part of the sleep training process. All right, those are my tips on transitioning away from swaddling and transitioning into a sleep sack. As I mentioned, you can hear my sleep sack recommendations in episode 76. And if you have a baby who's 12 weeks or younger and you're interested in learning how to gently guide your baby to full nights of sleep, an hour-plus long naps in their crib, and all the other things related to sleep during the first 4 months, be sure to check out my free class, 5 Common Mistakes That Can Undermine Your Newborn's Sleep. I'll link to this class in the show notes. And be sure to come back next week for the first episode in a summer pediatrician series. We'll be talking all about well visits in this first episode, and I can't wait for you to listen. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.